Killian, as well as our other congressional correspondent, Scott McFarland. They're both joining us from Washington. Nicole, we'll start with you. What more are you learning on this developing news story?
Well, we are getting some reaction from members of Congress, notably right now the House Judiciary Committee Republicans, and that committee is headed on the Republican side by Congressman Jim Jordan, who is the ranking member who retweeted this message. But basically, this coming from the main House Judiciary Republican account, saying this is what happens in third world countries, not the United States. Doesn't the FBI have better things to do than harass the former president? In caps. So again, this coming from Congressional Committee Republicans who serve on the Judiciary panel, which is noteworthy. We have also seen a reaction from other political entities, including the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, who also is a Trump ally, saying that this raid on President Trump's home is an unprecedented political weaponization of the Justice Department. She goes on to say that they have been after President Trump as a candidate, as president, and now as a former president. Using the criminal justice system in this manner is un-American. So in essence, we're kind of seeing the spin machine here in terms of a Republican response, and many now trying to say that this is just political, which is a line that we have heard through our reporting through Finn Gomez, who you just talked to as well, from some of the former president's aides and advisors who do believe that this is political and ridiculous, as one aide told Finn. So look, I'm sure we will continue to see reaction along these lines. I did reach out to, for instance, the Republican National Committee to see if maybe they have comment, and now that we are starting to see some of this political reaction come out from some of the president's allies and associates, and of course continuing to monitor what members of Congress are saying about this as well. I know there have been a lot of questions raised about the January 6th investigation. And as we know, this probe appears to be related to missing documents and dealing with this case involving the National Archives. But because we do know that the former president has been under investigation for matters related to January 6th, I think it's also worth noting in terms of congressional reaction that the January 6th Select Committee that has been investigating the January 6th attack does not at this time intend to comment on this matter, although certainly we do know that they have put the former president front and center in their probe in terms of alleging that they believe that he is culpable for the events of that deadly day. So that being said, that just kind of gives you a snapshot of some of the political reaction that we are starting to see, not only from some members of Congress, but also in the broader political sphere in terms of those who are allied with the former president.
Swift reaction from those allies, as you report, Nicole. Not a surprise necessarily. Scott McFarland, I want to bring you into this conversation because we have learned that this is related to those missing documents. You have actually been discussing this ongoing investigation, or rather the question of documents and archives with the very people who are responsible for archiving them. What more can you tell us, Scott?
Well, we know this is nearly 6 months to the day since the National Archives in Maryland asked the Justice Department to investigate those missing boxes of National Archives records that were later found in Mar-a-Lago. Some of them ripped to pieces, according to the archives, by hand and then reconstituted. We know the National Archives wanted a Justice Department investigation. We also know the National Archives has said it's been getting cooperation from the Trump team with its investigation. In his statement tonight, former President Trump says this search at his property happened despite his cooperation with investigators. Again, that aligns with the National Archives. We also know a congressional committee has been investigating these missing records too. Not the January 6th Select Committee, but the House Oversight Committee, which is a long way of saying There are any number of stakeholders interested in what happened with those records, but you don't have to cover enough. If you cover enough congressional committees, if you cover enough Justice Department investigations, you recognize pretty quickly investigations don't always end near where they started. If this is what launched an investigation today, there's no predetermined endpoint for this probe. No sense of where it goes. The Justice Department says repeatedly, it will follow facts wherever they lead when they launch an investigation. The January 6th Select Committee also said it would follow the facts wherever they lead, and we're watching that investigation play out publicly. It has sprawled into an unprecedented, massive investigation about January 6th, about the months before, about accused conspirators, and about Donald Trump. The Justice Department won't comment on this investigation. We reached out to the Justice Department office in D.C., where the January 6th investigation is led, and the Justice Department office in Maryland, where National Archives investigations are often led, because the National Archives is headquartered in Maryland. Neither commenting. Right now, the search warrant that triggered this search appears to be sealed by the federal court, so we can't read it yet. At this point, the best confirmation for what happened in this search and the scope of it is coming from the former president himself, and I'll repeat this point because it's worth repeating. He's not an unbiased party or an unbiased observer, Lana.
Yeah. And Scott, you made from the very onset of this a very important point, which is that there were multiple investigations and that we did not know initially when we heard from the former president which investigation this was related to. We have since learned that it is related to missing documents. As you have been following all of these different investigations into the former president and other investigations that are in some way related to the former president, even if he is not the direct target of that, I wonder how much information sharing, how much cooperation there is between all these different investigations and congressional committees.
That's a good question, because the Justice Department, according to the January 6th Select Committee, has been asking for them to share information, to share some of the depositions, the testimony, the transcripts of their depositions, to share them with the Justice Department to help support Justice Department prosecutions of the defendants who are charged in federal court for their roles in the U.S. Capitol attack. So they've sought information sharing. But let's just go over the list of investigations that have some nexus to the former president. In New York City, about taxes, about nonprofits and taxes connected to the former president. In Georgia, to alleged efforts to overturn the election results or challenge the election results in the state of Georgia in the 2020 presidential election. In Washington, D.C., this unprecedented, uniquely large investigation into the U.S. Capitol attack, the January 6th committee, and then there's that National Archives investigation and the request for the Justice Department to investigate what happened to those boxes of Mar-a-Lago records. Our reporting for CBS News tonight is this search relates to that investigation. But it's always difficult to manage and know where investigations end, because they're not publicly announced by the Justice Department, nor are they described by the Justice Department, unless or until they close, and unless and until there's some type of civil or criminal filing against somebody involved. Somebody, in this case, at Mar-a-Lago, near Mar-a-Lago, or in that orbit. So we're not going to get confirmation from the Justice Department. But I'll note this, just because we've heard several references to parallels with Watergate, this being unprecedented compared to Watergate. I'm just noting the date. It's August 8th. President Nixon resigned after Watergate on August 8th, 1974.
The parallel to Watergate, one that the former president himself made, and that, as you point out, is not without historical significance. Scott, as you say, when there is a search warrant executed, and that language I'm specifically choosing because it differs from how the former president characterized it as a raid, and as our Jeff Begay says, that's not what we have, quite what we've learned has happened on the ground. But as you have learned right now, it is sealed. Is there a possibility that more information, that it might become unsealed, and what would allow such an action to happen?
Yeah, most federal search warrants are sealed, especially when they're executed. Some of them do become unsealed. Sometimes it's accidental, and we find them and we see them. Sometimes it's deliberate because of some other component of the investigation, maybe a co-defendant or a related case. So sometimes search warrants are unsealed. before any type of civil or criminal proceeding is launched. So, yeah, it's possible. Most often, though, search warrants, when signed by a federal judge, are sealed. And we know because we hunt the federal courthouses across the country every day looking for unsealed search warrants, trying to find news. In his statement, the former president called this search an inappropriate search that was motivated by Democrats or were political in nature. I just want to give a little bit of the bearings on a federal search warrant. Yes, they can be requested by prosecutors, but they are signed by a federal judge or approved by a federal grand jury, neither of which, judges or grand juries, are political in nature. It's a non-political action when a search warrant is approved. Just a counterpoint to that claim. But search warrants often exist in that hidden space in federal court dockets where only the stakeholders can see them. So we keep searching, but we don't expect to find one, not in the short term.
All right. Scott McFarland, Nicole Killian, Finn Gomez want to thank you all for your reporting on this. But first, President Biden and the First Lady traveled to eastern Kentucky Monday to see the damage caused by days of deadly flooding last month. They toured some of the hardest hit communities. The Bidens also met with first responders and spoke with residents impacted by the destruction. The president vowed to help Kentuckians as they rebuild their communities.
And I promise you, we're staying, the federal government, along with the state and county and the city, we're staying until everybody's back to where they were. Not a joke.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Corey